Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to answer which one I think is a better dividend stock to buy for passive income investors. And the two dividend stocks I'm going to compare today is Ford and Verizon. I'm going to look at their dividend yield, their profitability, their cash flow, their total debt, and their valuation and determine which one I think is the better dividend stock to buy. So let's get right into it, starting with the dividend yield.
I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now.
Now, looking at the dividend yields, you can see that Verizon has a 6.82% dividend yield compared with Ford at 5.66%. Each of them have a nice dividend yield. That's on the higher end of average dividend yields, but Verizon has a better dividend yield here at 6.82%. But remember, as I always say, when you're investing in dividend stocks, you need to think about the total return, not just the dividend yield. It's nice that they have a nice dividend yield, but what about the stock price? What about the value of the stock? Is that likely to increase or decrease? Because you're going to be exposed to that increase or decrease as well. So let's look at those other factors that will work on the dividend and the stock price. So the next thing I have here is the dividend per share and the earnings per share. And what I want to see here is the earnings per share being above the dividend per share, because that's the only way you can sustain a dividend in the long term. And looking at this, I can see some fluctuations here for Ford where the dividend per share has been above the earnings per share, but only for brief moments. For the most part, its earnings per share have been above its dividend per share. Now for Verizon, that's always been the case for the last decade, where its earnings per share have comfortably been above the dividend per share. So if you're looking at which dividend is more sustainable in the long run, I would say Verizon's dividend is more sustainable in the long run. And if you look at the underlying business models, that also makes sense, right? Ford is selling cars. Selling cars is a very cyclical business. When the economy is doing well, Ford is doing well because people are getting jobs. And when you have a job, you need a car to get to work. And when your job improves, you make more money, you upgrade to a better car. That's all good news for Ford. But the opposite is also bad news for Ford. When people lose their jobs, they're not interested in buying a new car, so they'll keep their car for longer. When their job prospects are poor, they won't go to upgrade their car, they'll keep it for longer, and that's all bad news. So it's an up and down business. Compare that to Verizon, which sells, mobile connections, broadband internet. These things are not things that go up and down with the economy, not all that much at least, right? If you lose your job, one of the last things you're going to cancel is your wireless plan or your home internet plan, right? Those are essential things that you need to search for your next job or to do the things that you're used to doing already. That's an essential thing. You're not going to cancel that. But when things go really well, you might upgrade your cell phone to the newer cell phone a little bit quicker, and Verizon will benefit from that. But if you don't, if you keep your phone for 1 or 2 years longer, it's not going to be that much of a downside for Verizon. And so its business is more stable, and that's better for investors looking for dividend growth. The next thing I wanted to look at is revenue. And looking at the revenue over the last decade, you can see the clear demonstration of the cyclicality in Ford's business. You could see Ford's revenue exploding higher and then collapsing downward and then jumping back higher again. That's the nature of Ford's business. You can expect to see these kinds of fluctuations going forward for several years more, perhaps several decades more. Verizon, meanwhile, less cyclical, right? You don't see those big ups and downs as you do with Ford. You still see some up and down, just not as strongly as you see with Ford. But in the same time, Verizon has demonstrated nice revenue growth. The company's done a good job expanding the broadband services, expanding the number of subscribers, and also incrementally increasing the average revenue per user by offering better services, investing in 5G, by adding incremental devices like tablets and watches to your service plan. You're paying a little bit more every month. The next thing I wanted to look at is total long-term assets. And this demonstrates how good a company is at using their assets to generate revenue and profitability. All else being equal, I prefer a company with fewer assets generating the same amount of cash flow and profitability. And looking at this, you can see that Verizon is a much larger company than Ford, with total assets of 346 billion, long-term assets that is, compared to 146 billion for Ford Motor Company. It takes a lot of investment, as you're seeing, to build out that wireless broadband technology, the 5G technology, all of those wireless networks, the connections, the infrastructure, everything that's needed to build out that network is expensive. And you're seeing that here with Verizon. The next thing I wanted to compare these two on is the operating profitability. And looking at this metric, we can see that Verizon has clearly been better than Ford over the last decade. 22% most recently compared to 8% for Ford most recently. And I would say this 8% is at a higher than usual level for Ford. The company has benefited because of the supply chain shortages in the last year or two. The company's been able to sell its cars at higher prices, generate more profit. 8% would be about, 10% would be like the highest you can expect for Ford longer term. Whereas with Verizon, a, low to mid 20% operating profit margin can be sustainable for this company, because once it signs up a customer, it takes little money to service that customer, right? You get that customer on board, they just make their payments for using your network. The hard part is building out the network, and that's where we saw Verizon with the over $300 billion in long-term assets. That's the difficult part. It's capital intensive, but once you build the network, each incremental subscriber is lucrative. It's profitable for Verizon compared to Ford, where each car sale still generates thousands of dollars of expense, because you still got to build that car. That's a lot of material and labor going into each car made. So with all of these assets, I wanted to look at total long-term debt, and they're at similar levels here. Verizon at 147 billion compared to Ford at 142 billion. Both are large amounts of debt at over 140 billion. But comparatively speaking, let's see which one is more of a burden by looking at how much cash flow the company is generating. Total long-term debt is more of a factor comparatively to cash flow from operations. So that's what I have next here. Looking at cash flow from operations, Verizon clearly generates significantly more cash flow from operations, 37.7 billion in the most recent trailing 12-month period compared to just 13 billion for Ford. Looking at the cash flow from operations comparing to debt, the debt is more of a burden for Ford than it is for Verizon. And finally, I wanted to look at valuation. And looking at these measures, you can see Verizon is more expensive than Ford, trading at a forward price to earnings of 8.3, compared to Ford trading at a forward price to earnings of 5.8. So if I had to pick between one of these two dividend stocks to buy today, I would pick Verizon. I think Verizon is in a better position in the near term, at least, and the longer term, to sustain these dividend payouts to passive income investors. Did you know that over 90% of the people that watch my channel are not subscribed? It'll really help support my channel if you hit that subscribe button. And oh, by the way, one of the benefits of being subscribed is that I take requests from subscribers more often than I do from non-subscribers. So if you prefer that benefit, please subscribe to the channel.